Question from the floor. Go ahead.
Frank, just very quickly, in March of this year, Senator Dodd partnered with Senator Smith to make sure that over $2 billion was restored to the international foreign assistance budget. He also has called for an increase in the size of the Peace Corps from its current size of about 7,000 to go to 14,000 within the next 5 years. And he is someone who has said you need to have not just trade but aid to make sure that those developing countries have a chance to really partner with us.
Here's a question from the floor that plays right out of this. 2007 marks the halfway point to the deadline to meeting the Millennium Development Goals the United States signed on to in 2000 but says remarkably little about, says this questioner. What would your president do in their first 100 days to live up to the country's commitments to the Millennium Development Goals? First 100 days.
I'll start by saying Senator Dodd was the first to come out with a proposal to definitively set a timetable for the withdrawal of troops from Iraq. With that money, you have enough to go out there and make some real investments around the world to make sure that you show people that you are interested in diplomacy and development. You have $10 billion a month that you'd have the sooner you get our troops out. You also have an opportunity to consult and talk to our friends and allies in the region to make sure that once we do redeploy from Iraq, you have an opportunity to try to stabilize that region along with all of the Middle East and make sure that all of our partners see that we are interested in investing in aid and development.
How about President Obama? First 100 days.
Well, first thing, I'm going to do a shameless plug here because it's my bill, actually. There's a bill that I have that would require the U.S. to adopt a policy on combating global poverty to meet the Millennium Development Goals, put it in place, and then start working with partner countries and the private sector to achieve it. Getting that bill passed and getting a plan on the table, and also in that bill it lists a number of the things that would be necessary. Increase in foreign aid to the level that was recommended by the Millennium Development Goals, being one of the chief ones, and debt relief being another one. So get that policy in place and work towards it in those first 100 days.
One of the biggest threats that our world faces right now is global warming, and what that issue has the potential to do is pit the poorer countries of the world and the poorer people against the richer, because we know that the devastation is going to be much worse in poorer countries. I think one of the first things that Governor Richardson would do would announce that he was going to join an international regimen in greenhouse gases. He has on his website the most aggressive program in terms of tackling this. And by doing that, he would then be able to engage the rest of the world and reach out to the rest of the world and say, we're doing it now. We know we're responsible, the United States and the industrialized countries, for most of the greenhouse gas that's up there that's impacting our planet. But we want to join with all of you around the world and move forward.
Who else wants to talk about first 100 days and what your president's going to do to meet these Millennium Development Goals?
Frank, just very quickly, I think there's a tremendous symbolic power that the American president will bring with him or with her in 2009. And you have an opportunity in the first 100 days to set an agenda literally by what you do, even symbolically. And that means bringing together at the United Nations the major powers, the major developing countries, to recommit to the goals. That can set the tone for the next 4 years, and President Biden would do that.
And let me just say, I think President Clinton would do something very similar. I think one of the tragedies of the Bush administration has been not only the fact that they have compromised our standing in the world, but they have compromised our ability to lead, and they haven't led. And on these issues of combating global poverty, combating global hunger, we have lost credibility. On issues of human rights, we have lost credibility by our actions or our inactions. And I think that whoever the new president is, there is an opportunity to be able to rally the rest of the world behind these hopefully common goals, and to actually give everybody assignments. That's one of the problems with these agreements. We all sign these agreements, and then we leave, and then 10 years go by, and 15 years go by, and no one's done anything. We need to sign agreements that we mean to keep, and that means everybody has to take an assignment.
I'm coming back periodically to each of the individual candidates, certain things they've said or promised. So this one is for Congressman Smith here and Senator Obama, in laying out his plan. He's called for doubling the current foreign policy budget to about $50 billion by 2012. That's a big jump.
Foreign aid.
Foreign aid budget, I'm sorry. Can you share with us the reasoning behind that, what he does to make sure that foreign assistance is spent wisely, and the accountability that would then have to accompany that? How do you make sure that's not as is often said with respect to foreign assistance, that it's money down a rat hole.
Well, a couple things about it. First of all, the number is to reflect us, because part of the Millennium Challenge goals was to get certain countries up to a certain percentage of their GDP. I forget what the percentage was exactly, but we're not getting there. This gets us towards that percentage that we committed to, along with a fair number of other countries in the Millennium Challenge the Millennium Poverty goals that the UN set. Second, as far as how well you spend the money, I think one of the first points that needs to be made, as someone who does microcredit in Central America told me one time, nobody talks about, cutting off the Pentagon because there's waste there. We have to make sure that we don't give in to this argument that, hey, if I can find any amount of money that was wasted on foreign aid, that means that it doesn't work and we shouldn't do it. Let's make sure that we're committed to the goal and don't set an artificial bar. And the other things that you can do, one, I think the public-private partnerships is a great way to go, given all the private money that's out there and all the ideas that they have. Look at what works, figure it out, and put the money there. And the final thing I will say is to agree a little bit with Tony about, the Millennium Challenge accounts that the president set up were a very good thing. And he deserves credit for that, if for nothing else. Because I think that, first of all, it's set in motion a process of figuring out how can we make sure this money is being wisely spent? How can we pull governments up to the point where they're governing properly and you're not just putting money into an inefficient place? So I feel confident Senator Obama would continue that to make sure that that increase in funds is well spent.
So you mentioned that. If I can follow up with a question from the floor. Is there any aspect of the Bush administration overall foreign policy that your candidate appreciates or agrees with?
That would be one. Millennium Challenge counts. And I will also say the commitment on AIDS. Now, I think the criticisms that Tony mentioned were spot on, but nonetheless, he made a commitment. At the time he made the commitment, I think we were pretty much all sitting there as he gave the State of the Union speech, and I was like, yeah, right, like we'll ever see that money. And we did. And I think those are two things that I think, we can be complimentary about.
Anybody else want to compliment the Bush administration before we move on?
Not really. Just going to leave me hanging out there. Yeah.
No, but it's not insignificant because, of course, the Iraq situation, and one of the questioners mentions this in a comment, is the overhang to everything else. But the world does turn, and the Africa Initiative is a very significant change in funding and recognition.
They say just quickly, since in a rare moment the floor was ceded to one candidate saying good things about Bush, I guess we'll get you that. We want to make sure that we don't make the same mistake the Bush administration made, where literally their pathology was, if Clinton was for it, we're against it. I mean, literally. I mean, you guys are all studied. You know the examples better than I do. Let's judge the idea on its merits and not get caught up in this. Whatever the other guy was for, we're going to be against.
Question from the floor.
Frank, if I
sorry, go ahead.
chime in. On one hand, we talk about AIDS for developing countries, especially in Africa, and on the other hand, we see inaction in Darfur. And so you give them with one hand, you throw away with the other. I think that's the difficulty with this administration. It has no foresight. I will compliment them to a degree on the president's effort to deal with immigration reform. While it's not considered a foreign policy issue, it certainly affects our neighbors and our friends abroad. The difficulty, again, he proposes in one hand and squanders in the other by not allowing his Republican colleagues in the Senate to move forward with any type of legislation.
So let me follow that up with you then. So how would your candidate address the issue in Darfur?
I think he would have been far more aggressive. He would have sent more resources immediately. He would have worked with the UN to try to provide the resources and the personnel needed to try to quell the violence that was going on. It is genocide. We know it is. And ultimately, I think President Dodd would make the decision. If no one else will do it, we will.
Anybody else? Okay. My next question. Some interesting comments. In 1961, President Kennedy said the collapse of developing countries, and I'm quoting here, would be disastrous to our national security, harmful to our comparative prosperity, and offensive to our conscience. In 2006, the Bush administration's national security strategy said development reinforces diplomacy and defense, reducing long-term threats to our national security by helping build stable, prosperous, peaceful societies. If your president was to articulate the policy and the direction and the purpose of foreign assistance and America's foreign policy for that matter, what would their organizing principle be? Would it be different?